Imagine waking up to find that one of the planet's most strategic alliances has been thrown into doubt overnight. That is exactly what is happening right now. In a move no one expected, the United States government decided to suspend a military support package that was about to be delivered to Taiwan. A decision valued at hundreds of millions of dollars and discussed for months as a central piece of the island's defense. This gesture is not just a bureaucratic detail. It changes the rules of the game across the entire Indo-Pacific, where China, Japan, Korea, and several powers watch every step from Washington with scrutiny. Behind this choice lies a clear but unsettling logic. American foreign policy has shifted from long-term commitments to short-term bargaining. Taiwan, long presented as an indispensable partner, now finds itself turned into a bargaining chip in commercial talks with Beijing. This raises an inevitable question: how reliable is the American word? If a historic partner like Taiwan can be placed on the table as part of a deal, who can truly feel safe? In Taipei, the reaction was immediate. The island's political leadership tries to maintain a discourse of strategic partnership with the United States. But behind the scenes, the sense of vulnerability is growing. The suspension not only weakens trust in American commitments, but also strengthens the perception that Taiwan must accelerate its own defense investments, regardless of external promises. For Beijing, the message is different. Political and economic pressure works, and if they insist long enough, Washington's determination begins to waver. This is the portrait of a world in transition. Alliances that once seemed unbreakable are now under question. What is at stake is not only the future of Taiwan, but the stability of the entire Indo-Pacific. The silence of the coming hours will be decisive, and the way Beijing and Tokyo react could set the tone for a new phase of global competition. If you want to understand how these changes could affect not only Asia, but also the world order in the coming years, stay tuned until the end. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a like and comment. Do you believe the United States is still a trustworthy ally? While in Washington, the suspension is presented as a temporary adjustment to maintain room for negotiation with Beijing, in Taipei, the reading is completely different. The Taiwanese government sees in this decision a dangerous crack in what once looked like a protective wall. Decades of cooperation, intelligence sharing, and acquisition of advanced equipment now appear fragile in the face of a political gesture that could be reversed with a single meeting between leaders. It is as if trust built with effort, time, and risk has been turned into a casino chip, used only when it suits the player of the moment. Taiwan had already been warning about the need for self-reliance, but now that agenda is no longer a long-term project and has become a national urgency, the Parliament is debating a rapid expansion of the defense budget, direct purchases of new missile systems, and even the creation of partnerships with countries beyond the United States. The feeling is clear. If the White House can hesitate, then Taipei must learn to survive on its own. For an island constantly under the shadow of its giant neighbor, this shift in posture may be the only path to ensure survival. Meanwhile, Beijing watches in calculated silence. There were no fiery statements or immediate demonstrations of strength, but the message has already been received. China's insistence on applying pressure, both militarily and economically, is starting to work. The simple fact that Washington steps back at a critical moment is interpreted as a strategic victory in Beijing. For Xi Jinping and his team, every sign of hesitation from the opponent is fuel to reinforce the narrative that unification is only a matter of time, and that the United States, in the end, will not risk everything for Taiwan. This battle of perceptions is as important as the weapons on the ground. For allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, the doubt is inevitable. If Taiwan can be set aside, what guarantees that they will not be next? The suspension of support is not just a technical detail, it is a geopolitical earthquake shaking the balance of power across the Indo-Pacific. Amid this turbulence, one contrast stands out. While aid to Taiwan is suspended, Washington carries out one of the most provocative military exercises of recent years with Japan, known as Resolute Dragon. In it, US and Japanese troops operate side by side with next-generation missile systems, such as the Typhoon and Nemesis, capable of striking targets thousands of kilometers away, including deep within continental Asia. At the same time that one ally is left waiting, another receives a public show of force and technology. It is a contradiction that raises more questions than answers. For Japan, these exercises send a double message. On the one hand, the clear signal that the alliance is still strong and that the US is willing to invest in military interoperability. On the other, the shadow of doubt. Is this display of power really a lasting commitment or just a temporary performance used as a bargaining tool in upcoming trade talks? Washington's strategic dissonance confuses allies and encourages rivals, creating an environment where no one knows exactly how far the American word will go. China, for its part, responds with official indignation. It classifies the missile systems as a direct threat to its security and denounces the maneuver as destabilizing. But behind the scenes, the reading is more complex. Beijing sees US inconsistency as proof that the country lacks a clear strategic line. Sometimes it pushes, sometimes it retreats, sometimes it shows strength, sometimes it backs away from commitments. This oscillation makes American policy vulnerable because it sends the world the message that everything can change according to circumstances and immediate convenience. This inconsistency is not just a communication detail. It directly affects the global perception of American leadership. When allies do not know if they can trust and opponents perceive room to exploit contradictions, the risk of miscalculation rises exponentially. The result is an Indo-Pacific more volatile than ever, where each move can trigger a chain reaction difficult to control. And in the middle of this equation, Taiwan, the island that was supposed to be protected, remains on the front line, but now with fewer guarantees that someone will hold the shield beside it. The scenario becomes even more symbolic when we remember the recent military parade hosted by Beijing. China showcased to the world hypersonic aircraft, directed energy weapons, and an arsenal few nations could match. And it was not only the display of equipment that drew attention. Next to Xi Jinping stood Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, two leaders who together reinforced the image of an authoritarian axis consolidating its space. The message was clear. If the US hesitates, there are others ready to fill the gap. This alignment of interests is precisely what worries Washington's allies the most. The region is no longer defined only by local disputes, but by a global game of power. What happens with Taiwan resonates in Seoul, Tokyo, Canberra, and even Brussels. Every American gesture is examined under a magnifying glass, and every hesitation reinforces the perception that it is necessary to have independent plans to survive in an increasingly unpredictable world. And here arises the real question. Are we witnessing the beginning of an era where the United States is no longer the guarantor of trust in the Indo-Pacific? Or is this just an isolated episode within a broader strategy? While leaders debate, facts on the ground show that the arms race is accelerating and that the risk of miscalculation is increasing week by week. And you, what do you think of this move? Was it a smart play to negotiate with China, or a strategic mistake that could prove costly in the future? Leave your comment below and join the debate, because this discussion is not only for governments, it concerns all of us. At the heart of this impasse lies the notion of credibility. The strength of the United States has never been just its aircraft carriers or its long-range missiles. It was the trust that, when they promised protection, they would be there. That was the invisible foundation that sustained alliances from the Pacific to Europe. Now, by treating military aid to Taiwan as a bargaining chip, that foundation begins to crack. It is not only Taiwan that feels exposed. It is the entire ecosystem of alliances built over decades of diplomacy. For countries like Japan and South Korea, which depend heavily on the US presence to balance Chinese and North Korean pressure, the dilemma is clear. If the United States hesitates to support Taiwan, what guarantees it won't hesitate in other critical scenarios? That doubt, even if kept quiet, already erodes the solidity of the trust pact that has shaped regional balance since the end of World War II. Meanwhile, Beijing plays the long game. China's strategy has always been patient, based on gradual advances and exploiting the cracks left by adversaries. Each American hesitation is interpreted as another step up the ladder leading to the ultimate goal, reducing Washington's influence in the region and eventually achieving its proclaimed reunification. In this long game, whoever loses credibility loses much more than a battle. They lose the ability to deter before the first shot is even fired. American contradictions also reverberate outside the Indo-Pacific. In Europe, observers follow closely, recalling that the same transactional logic has already been applied to Ukraine. Conditional support, alternating promises, and negotiations that cast doubt on the solidity of historical commitments. What we see is a pattern. The United States has ceased to be predictable, and this changes how allies plan their future. This instability produces cascading effects. The more wavering the US position, the greater the willingness of other blocs to arm themselves and seek autonomy. It is no coincidence that, at the same time aid to Taiwan is suspended, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom announce unprecedented military expansions. For them, blindly trusting Washington no longer seems a viable option. It is as if the world is learning the lesson that in 2025, every nation must be able to sustain itself, even if the American umbrella fails. In the Indo-Pacific, that same logic pushes Taiwan to speed up domestic arms production and strengthen ties with other regional partners. The message is clear: relying exclusively on the United States is a risk that can no longer be ignored, and this new calculation not only strengthens the self-reliance of some nations, but also redraws the entire map of global alliances. The balance of power no longer revolves around a single pole. It is fragmenting into multiple centers of influence. In the end, what is at stake is not just Taiwan, nor even the balance of the Indo-Pacific. What we are seeing is a global test of trust. If the United States treats strategic commitments as disposable cards in a negotiation, then the whole world must prepare for a new era, in which alliances are not guarantees, but temporary arrangements subject to immediate interests. It is the transition from an order based on trust to an order based on cold calculation. This shift is redefining the behavior of regional powers. Denmark in the Arctic excludes Washington from military exercises. The European Union advances with its own sanctions in the Middle East. India adopts a more assertive stance toward Pakistan without waiting for anyone's approval. These are signs of an increasingly multipolar world where each country learns to survive without depending on a single guardian. For Taiwan, the lesson is harsh but clear. Relying only on external promises can become a sentence of vulnerability. And for the United States, the consequence is even deeper. Each hesitation, each moment, treating allies as expendable pieces, opens the door for other actors to define the rules of the game. And now I want to know your view. Do you think this suspension is just a tactical move, or are we witnessing the decline of an ally that can no longer uphold its word? Comment below, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because in the next videos, we'll explore how these shifts are accelerating the global arms race. The world is changing before our eyes, and you cannot afford to be left out of this analysis.